reported in favor. Maxon Snyder Presents is back.
In the name of Yahweh Elohim and Yeshua HaMashiach, we declare protection over this meeting, the people involved, the families involved, and those that are online. Amen.
Amen.
We're going to talk about demonic deliverance in the family. I want to start with a few comments and some references, and then I want to turn it over to some people that have had experience in this area, particularly Christina Brink. First of all, the kingdom is taken by violence, and violent ones desire to have it. We can interpret that in many ways. One way I do is by the demonic host. One of their main goals, it appears, is to disrupt the family, destroy the family unit, destroy children of righteous people. And ofttimes, because it's such a dirty business, families, even believing families, are ill-equipped to deal with this particular evil. I would say in the main affects children, because children can see these entities, especially when they're young. I've had some rather extensive experience and training in this area. I can speak from, firsthand experience from both the training portions and having to deal with this in families, including my own. I had a 14-year marriage that was literally a training course in casting out or ridding a household of demonic entities, especially one particularly big one. There are some people that want to get into this ministry, and if they're called by the Spirit to do so, they should. But I would also mention that it is essential that one is prepared before doing it, because there are varieties of these entities. We don't know where they come from, and we have theories that come out of the Bible and so forth. Probably the most illuminating thing that I have read about the origin of evil, or in this case, they're not evil, is in the religion of Kahuna. Kahuna has, though it is an outlawed religion and has literally hundreds and hundreds of years of analyzing these things from the perspective of not only enemies but friends. And the theories that go along in the Kahuna religion are very thorough, but you have to get the right book on Kahuna. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of New Age nonsense that they use today. And I can't tell you which book it is for sure. But if you want to go into this ministry, the training I would recommend, and I'm old school here, is a course originating from Christian International in Santa Rosa, Florida. It's called Restoring the Foundations. There is a Restoring the Foundations Center in North Carolina, and I've been out of touch with the people for quite some time, but they built a building just to teach this and show people how to practice it. It comes from a team effort. It's a team ministry, and they go into great depth in collecting the history, the religious spirituality, and the statistics of a family before they even begin any kind of deliverance ministry, because it is helpful to know where this stuff has come from if you could discover it. And then what they do is in seminars, you split up into groups of 4, and you practice this. You practice it for a week. It's a week of training. I still have the notebooks for it, and I learned a lot, and I used their method for quite some time. It's best if you're thinking about team ministry in this area, because you need at least one more to help you with it.
This is Brother Schruumkoff. A little note about Restoring the Foundations. Yes, that's the name of the website, restoringthefoundations.org. And a little blurb here from the website is that most people have learned something about first aid, whether it's as simple as cleaning a scratch and applying a Band-Aid, or as advanced as administering CPR. Knowing the appropriate response to bring comfort and immediate healing is always powerful and can even be life-saving. The old saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, is as true in the spiritual realm as it is in the physical. Restoring the Foundation's resources help you discover and learn to apply the biblical revelation of the integrated approach to life's wounds, past, present, and future. These practical and empowering resources can help you or someone you know and love respond to or even avoid hurtful situations as they occur. In your closest relationships, you can be equipped to bring understanding, prevention, and healing in normal day-to-day life, preventing many of the struggles and disappointments of a broken and fallen world. The integrated approach to biblical healing, that's essential for life's most important relationships, such as marriage and pre-marriage, parenting, friendships, and workplace relationships. Become equipped to help yourself, your family, your friends, and your community walk in freedom. And as Brother Snyder said, having gone through this training, it has been a real boon for us here at Vero Essene Yahad, because we're all learning this and finding ways that we can banish the darkest demons from our realm and bring our realm into the kingdom completely and quickly as well. Brother Snyder?
Second of all, comment, yesterday a fellow called me from Tampa, and he said, do you do deliverance ministry? And I told him, well, yes and no. I try to avoid it, but sometimes you have to do it. And he asked me the question, in what name do you do it in? I say, I do it sometimes in the name of Yeshua, but that usually doesn't work. What works most often is Jesus, because of the variety of entities you're dealing with, anywhere from occult spirits that are almost human in every way except without the body, and they're smart. But you use other kinds of demons. They go clear down to they go from insectoid beings clear on up to these occult masters and everything in between. Animalistic, childish, adolescent, right on up to these masters that have ascended from someplace. And it's very helpful to know what you're dealing with there. And a lot of times I'll give the example. If you want to try that out, you can go to a department store and inevitably there'll be a child screaming someplace bloody murder and a mother or somebody there yelling at them to be quiet. These are usually animalistic things that are easy to get out, and you can do it from 6 aisles away. If you want to try it, cast it out of that child. You tell the enemy to leave that child, resist its work against them, and you send that thing to the feet of Yahshua for him to do what he will. Usually they're spirits of air, earth, wind, fire, netherworld, or gloom. That's something you can try right off the bat. That child typically will stop crying within 20 to 30 seconds. You don't have to be anywhere near him. You just need to deal with it. And then I told him I usually don't use any name. Why not? I said, how can you cast out a demon without using the proper name? Yahshua said, I give you authority. He came to destroy the works of the devil. And we are sent here to do exactly the same thing. No name needs to be called because you are the authority on this and you are their commander. It might be hard to get that thing to go, but it's your own authority through your investedness of the Holy Spirit and the gift of discernment that brings about a successful deliverance or exorcism. There are some books, like I said, I'm old school on this. You find something that works, why vary from it? Books that are extremely helpful in this, and the first one I would suggest to you is Malachi Martin, and what's the name? Hostage to the Devil, the possession and exorcism of 5 contemporary Americans. There are 5 case histories there. Malachi Martin was the briefcase carrier for the Pope, if I'm not mistaken. For many years, he was interested in deliverance ministry, so he attended as many Catholic deliverance sessions as he could. One of the things that he makes very clear there, that usually the one assigned in the diocese to do this, whenever the time comes up to do it, is not experienced, not very spiritual. It's kind of like, we're going to give Paul the right hand of fellowship so we can get him out of here. It's assigned to somebody that doesn't have any training. They don't provide any training. All 5, if I remember, all 5 of these priests that tried to do this ended up dead. because of it. They didn't know what they were doing. And second of all, I would suggest the movie The Exorcist. I would suggest this because I met the technical director of that movie. In fact, he just died last week. And he tried, through the Catholic ritual and through his experience in witnessing exorcisms on usually one person. And his intention was to help the movie makers make it as authentic as they possibly could. And he said, well, they took some liberties, yes. But by and large, it was very realistic, especially by the standards of what the movie was based on, an actual case, I believe in 1942, of a child, an adolescent, being demon-possessed and the Catholic Church coming in to do something about it once it was considered a bona fide. So that's the second one, the Exorcist. A third one is any material on the subject by Charles Kraft. I think the main one there is Defeating Dark Angels. He also has one that will help a person that's called to this ministry realize what kind of power they have. That book is called I Give You Authority. Another one I would recommend is by Father Francis McNutt out of Jacksonville, Florida. He also is deceased now, though his work carries on through various ministries. They also train, McNutt's groups train people how to do this in a way that is quiet and very effective. I have gone through deliverance with the McNutt's ministry myself for a certain problem I was having. It was a family problem, a problem in my birth family that had followed me along all those years until I finally went to see if I could have something done about it. And it was successful. And yes, something manifested for sure. Then McNutt. He's got several books. He's out on this subject, or healing also. He was known as a great spiritual physician. His ministry is now, who's in charge of it is Norma Deering, who you can readily find online. Of course, this is going to be very Christianized. I also wanted to mention about Malachi Martin's book. At the end of it, it's got the full Roman Catholic liturgy for exorcism in there, so you can study it, and Martin has lots of notes in there as well. But this is something you want to go into with the exception of children, not without being prepared. I had an incident some years ago where my best friend was a pastoral ministry in North Georgia, and he didn't really believe in demonic possession and infiltration. However, he had a 2-year-old child that could talk, and he says, I prayed and prayed and prayed for this child because every service I do the Eucharist in the service, and the child goes crazy, howls and screams, turns red, falls on the floor, and everything like that. He said, I don't know what to do. So I went over to be with him, and I witnessed this child as well. And in the course of the work of deliverance of the child turned red, screaming bloody murder, rolled on the floor, and shouted over and over and over again, I hate the blood of Jesus. I hate the blood of Jesus. And that wasn't in his voice even. So once we got to the point of knowing what that thing was, we were able to expel that and expel it for good. This boy grew up to be a fearless young prophet. But at the age of 18, it came back. And he took his father's gun, shot himself, killed himself at 18. This was one of the most upright kids that I've ever met and devout. And the reason that he did this is because this thing came back in through a witch, the friendship or love of a witch. So it's very, very serious business. One of the first questions I got when I did a show on deliverance was, will you do deliverance ministry for me? I'll add now parenthetically that if you go online to jspresents.org, I have 3 or 4 sessions there in which I describe a situation that I got into in the year 2001, where hordes of demons invaded the small country town in which I was ministering or assigned to by the church. And I'm talking about demons that showed themselves, animalistic things, demons that would incubus, that would come into the old women of the church and pleasure them to the point where the women of the church enjoyed the visits, didn't want the thing to go away. It got to the point where we actually all talked about it in the church. And it took 4 years to figure out where those things came from, hordes of them, and how to get rid of them. Hordes, I'm talking about, I was affected too. On 2 or 3 occasions, I was attacked by some type of monstrous being that did things to me that I could not resist. One of those times, this thing appeared to me visibly, and I saw it, and I describe it in that video and how supernaturally we found the key to locking this whole horde up for good. As I said, it took 4 years. That is really worth listening to, at least the first 2 parts of it. It's called Hordes of Demons. What was that thing I was talking about right before that? I got off the subject there.
Was that before the women were visiting?
Yeah, right before that. Well, I forgot.
Was this the one with the hole in the basement?
There was a hole in the woods out and behind the house, as it turned out. But a lot of supernatural things happened to find the final solution. It was like clues came in from various different places, including there's a ministry that actually tracks the moving of demons across the street through email. I mean, across the country through email. And even that organization got in on that. If you want to look that up, I can just remember the name of the guy. This is the proprietor of the ministry. His name's Chris Ward. Okay, so we have a situation, and I believe, are you willing to talk about it candidly? I can take your names off when I edit it. Are you willing to do that? Okay, why don't you come up here and discuss it a little bit.
Okay, so over the last, I guess, 4 or 5 years, me and my wife have dealt with an episode or an issue within our house. It actually started before we got married. We've been married for about 4 years, a little over 4 years. And we both have children from previous, for me, it was the first marriage. My wife has 2 children from a previous marriage. And for myself, it started with my son, who at the time was about 3 years old. His biological mother, had made some bad decisions when she was a child. When she was a young teenager, got involved with her and some of her friends, got a hold of a spell book and did what she described as a love spell for some guys that they had crushes on in school. And she said, the funny thing was it didn't work, but then like 2 years later, all these guys suddenly became obsessed with us. But at that point, we had lost interest in them, but it was almost to the point that I was going to have to get a restraining order. So, she had told me that, and I thought it was kind of odd, but long story short, after she and I split up, I began noticing that my son was having behavioral issues, and this was right about the time that I really kind of came back into the faith and started studying the scriptures and trying to live a Torah observant lifestyle. And so the Father had been leading me to different books and teachers and such as that. And I noticed that he suddenly started directing me toward issues like books about deliverance and ministers that talked a lot about spiritual oppression and that kind of thing. And I can remember thinking well, this is kind of weird. Why is he leading me in this direction? And that's about the time that the behavioral problems started coming up with my son. And so one night I'm putting him to bed, and I can't get him in bed. The kid is just like a wild animal, like trying to put a raccoon in bed or something. He was clawing at me and just barring his teeth at me. And this is only like a 3 or 4 year old kid. And suddenly I just said, in the name of Yeshua, come out of him. And suddenly he just stopped and just almost went limp in my hands. And he laid in his bed and he looked at me. He kind of looked stunned. And he looked at me and says, "Daddy, is that Yeshua?" And he pointed behind me. And I looked behind me and there's nothing there, just a blank wall. And I was like, "Do you see something there?" And he goes, "Yeah, I see something." I was like, "What does it look like?" And he told me it was yellow, but I asked him to describe it and he couldn't describe it. But I said, "Does it look good or bad?" And he said, "It looks bad." So I commanded it out of the room, and he said that basically from what he said, it went up into the smoke detector. It's an electronic smoke detector, and that's the way it exited the room. And I didn't tell anybody about that. It's not really something that you go and talk about. But this episode would continue, and it seemed like it was every time that he would come back from visiting his mother, I would have a repeat of that same situation. And so at about that time is when I started dating the woman who would become my wife, and we ended up taking the children to Sukkot down in Florida. And while there, he had another one of these episodes, and it was even worse than the ones that I'd had with him. I mean, he was just trying to claw Christina's eyes out. She was trying for about 45 minutes to an hour to get him in his sleeping bag, and he just wouldn't have it. I mean, she was trying to sing him to sleep or whatever to get him to calm down, and he was just like a tiger. Finally, I walked in the tent and I commanded that thing to get out of him in the name of Yeshua, and he just went completely limp in her arms. And he just like fell over. His head was almost like he instantly fell asleep. We rolled him over into a sleeping bag, and he lay down, and he was out cold within seconds. Gabriel, her oldest son, saw something. Like he asked us what was that, and our response was just go to sleep. It wasn't until the next day that I thought about what he had said, and I was like, I think that he saw something. I don't think that he was asking, what did I do or what happened. So we talked to him, and he said that he actually saw this demon come out of our youngest, and it basically, he described it as, it looked like an angel, like it was wearing a robe, like flowing garments, but it faded away as it got closer to the ground. But it was a humanoid shaped thing. And since then, there's been several other episodes, and I'll let my wife tell you about some of it also. But this was an ongoing battle that we fought for, I guess, about 3 years.
I guess my story starts way before that. My husband, thank God, he was able to learn about all of that, and that God gave him the insight and the knowledge to start reading the books that he did, because then we were able to stand together. But I've been dealing with demonic spirits since I was 8. I mean, real young. Like, I was introduced to intercession and prayer. I mean, I talked about this yesterday a little bit about why I got involved with the things that I do. And I didn't go into a lot of detail then because it wasn't relevant at that yesterday. But when Jackson asked me to talk about my experiences, I decided to go ahead and share a little bit of my story, and I'll try to be as brief as possible. But basically what happened was as I was growing up, God placed within me the ability to be able to be an intercessor from a very young age, very young. And it was about 12 to 13 when I started actually being introduced to these demonic spirits that were coming into my home through some actions that my father was involved with. And I would have them attack me at nighttime. At one point, I was interceding for a friend of mine. Again, I had talked about the lady who had been involved, that me and my friends had started an online ministry, and we were praying for people and interceding for them, and she had infiltrated, and come to find out later, she became a believer, and she confessed her sins to us in the respect that she had come with the intent to break us up and to wreak havoc on us spiritually and physically if she could, because the enemy had sent her. So we had all this experience with all of that, and while I was interceding for her and praying for her, God showed me a lot of different things that had happened to her as she was growing up. And it helped me be able to understand how to intercede for her. But while I was in that state, I had a pretty strong demonic influence enter my bedroom at that point, and I had my back away from the wall, and I was facing the wall, and I heard footsteps that were running towards me, and it tried to attack me, and I turned over and I yelled at it. I said, out of here in the name of Jesus, because at that point I didn't know anything different. And it stopped, sunk to the floor, and flew out the window, and it never came back. So I've had these kinds of experiences pretty much my entire life, all the way through my adulthood. I've been attacked physically. One thing I will point out is that if the enemy cannot physically attack you, if he cannot spiritually convince you to walk away from God, he will do something to your health. He will reach you through your children. He will reach you through your family, through anything that matters to you. If you think about the story in the Old Testament where Balaam was trying to curse all of Israel, he couldn't do it. Like, he could not directly curse Israel, but he caused them to curse themselves by putting circumstances in front of their faces that made it seem like it was okay to go after these pagan women.
You are listening to Jackson Snyder Presents on Hebrew Nation Radio. We'll be right back after these important announcements.
Jack's back now with Brad and Christina Brink.
And the same thing can be said of us. Like, the enemy will put things in our path that will keep us from being able to fulfill what God wants us to do for our lives. So by the time that my husband and I were seeing each other, I had already dealt with this a lot. And then the instance happened when we'd only been dating for a few months, but God very specifically told us separately that we were going to be getting married down in Secaucus, in Florida. And I didn't say anything to him. He didn't say anything to me. We traveled for hours to go down there, and nobody said anything to each other. And it came up that we were expecting that we were going to be doing that. And we're like, no, but we already have the wedding planned. We're not going to do that to our family unless there's a really good reason for it. And then this happened. The instance that my husband was talking about was when we were down there at Secaucus. And the child, my son, he was thrashing. He was biting me. He was spitting at me. He was clawing at me. And he had just turned 4. There was no way for him to be able to do the things he was doing. I had him in a hold. I've been in martial arts, so I know how to put people in holds, especially children, to keep them from running away. My oldest is autistic, and so I've had to put him in holds as well to keep him from running off. So I'm experienced at this, and the child was still trying to get away from me and almost succeeded, and he was able to do all of this stuff to me while I was doing that. And literally, when my husband rebuked it and it came out of him, he went limp in my arms, and then my husband told him, go get in bed, and he was obedient immediately. Well, we've been having, over the course of the last several years, it was just progressively getting worse and worse and worse until about a year ago. I think January of last year, it got extremely bad. And it got to one point, like, I've had all this experience with demonic influences, and I looked at my husband, I said, I don't know what else to do. We're constantly bombarded with these hordes of demons, and they're becoming high-level demons. It's not some little thing that we just rebuke once and it comes out like it did that one time. The first time it happened, I said, what we're dealing with is some high-level demons, and there's multiple of them that keep trying to attack him. And so in the process of all of this going on, I'm talking to a couple of friends of mine that are real close, that this isn't something you go and talk about with a bunch of different people, because they don't believe you and they think you have 3 heads. They look at you like you're some kind of monster and that you're crazy. Even those who are believers and believe that there are demons and that believe that there is a spiritual war out there, they still look at you like you don't know what you're talking about and like, oh, I don't want to have anything to do with this. But this lady, there was a couple of them, but this one particular lady said, I had the same problem, and I've discussed it with some other people as well. And she says it's become pretty commonplace that around the age of 2 is when these kids are, if there's going to be something that happens, it's very common for it to happen when they turn 2. And the reason why is because they're small, they don't know what's going on, and their mouths are able to be used by these demons, and they're very friendly. Like, the children themselves are very friendly. And she had expressed to me that at one point her son he was 2, and she had just had his sister, and she was just a baby. And the little boy decided he was visited by a demon on the playground. And it's on the playground, and it's very, very common that happens. They'll meet them on the playground and they'll talk to them and they'll see them. And this little boy said that there was this demon, didn't know it was a demon, I forget his name, but had introduced himself as a person. And to the child, he was an actual person in the flesh, even though no one else could see him except this child. And he said, your parents don't care about you anymore. They don't have time for you. They have a new child in the house. And so I will take care of you if you'll let me come home with you, or you let me come home. And that's all they need, is a foothold to be able to get into that house.
Exactly.
And that's how that animalistic spirit got into that house. And she said that every time that they would go to sleep, her daughter would scream bloody murder all night long. And come to find out, the little boy was seeing this spirit inside his sister's room at nighttime. And so when she expressed to me all of this, I thought, maybe the same things happen. And so I didn't lead my son to say anything as to, yeah, this is what happened. But I did ask him, I said, have you been seeing anything that we don't see? And so he started telling us that, yes, indeed, there had been a spirit who had visited him and asked to come into the house. And last year about this time, we got to the point where we finally, until my son was ready to accept Yeshua and start on his path. and to make that conscious choice every single day that he's going to choose him, we had to quit casting the demon out. Because the reason why is because every time that we did it, there would be 7 more that would come and find it swept, and they would take over. And after a while, it was almost impossible. I mean, through the power of God, of course, we have power over these demons, but it was a very long and arduous thing to get these demons, these high-level demons, to leave. I don't understand everything about dimensions and how all of these things work in physics and all of that, but I do understand that they probably do live in different dimensions. And especially the higher level demons, when they come into the room, the reason why you feel cold is because it takes a lot of energy, a lot of heat to transfer from one dimension to the next. And at one point, there was a demon in our house, and it had gone into my son's room and had scared him. And our youngest calls my husband in there to come pray for him, and he goes in there to pray for him, which was completely unusual because by the time it was time for bed, he went on to sleep, but he was still awake. And my husband went in there, prayed for him, and he went to sleep. And then our older 2 started calling us and telling us that we need to come back there. And we thought, guys, just go to sleep. No, seriously, come back here. And we walked into the room. It was ice cold. The rest of the house was warm. It was like 74 degrees in the house.
Yeah, it wasn't just that he asked me to pray over him. He called me in there kind of out of the blue and said that he wanted to say the sinner's prayer again, that he felt like he had made some bad decisions since his initial, come to Jesus moment. And he felt like that he needed to confess his sins. And so he did. He told me some things that he had done, just, kid stuff. I, pulled my sister's hair, whatever, just little kid things that they do. And then he asked Yeshua for forgiveness and did the whole, I'm a sinner, will you please forgive me thing. And so that was, and it just so happened that my sister, who was in college at the time there in Knoxville where we lived, she came to visit, and she just happened to be in the house at that moment. But then, so when he said that sinner's prayer and I went back in and sat down, it wasn't just a couple of minutes later and our other children were calling us. And even then I went in there and I sat down. I told my wife, it's like, as soon as he said that prayer, it's like the whole spiritual atmosphere in the room changed. As I let you continue. Sorry for interrupting you.
No, it's okay. And so at that point, we went into the room of our older 2 who were sharing a room, and the room was ice cold. And we were asking them what was going on. And there was a definite presence in the room. And my daughter said that books were levitating and flipping open, and they were hearing things. And so I went out to get my husband and bring him back in, and I looked at my sister-in-law. I said, I'm sorry, but we're going to have to cast the demon out of the house. And she kind of looked at us because she's never had any kind of experience with that before.
And so I went back into the bedroom, and I felt this presence also. And that day I'd just been reading in the book of Enoch, and something that stuck with me when I was reading it is it mentioned the archangels, and it said that one of the angels was over the other spiritual powers or whatever, and it was Uriel. And I remember that. So I was in there and I said, and instead of demanding the demon leave, I said, Father Yahuwah, will you please send your angel Uriel to do battle against this being that's here that's not welcome. And when I said that, everything started happening in the house. There was what I remember. Well, I know the lights started flickering. I feel like, I'm not sure if the house literally did this, but I felt like there was some sort of like a vibration, almost like an earthquake, and something went down the hallway, and it almost felt like that there was a wind that just rushed through the room. And it's almost like hell broke loose all of a sudden when I said that, as soon as I mentioned the name of that angel. And my sister said that something went down the hallway and grabbed hold of her leg, and it was like this ice cold hand had a hold of her leg. And our dog got up, and the dog went over and started smelling her leg in the exact spot and was whimpering
and growling.
Yeah.
But the lights were flickering as it was going down the hallway, and as it was leaving, you could tell where it was because the lights were flickering. And then I opened the door because I was with my sister-in-law standing there. And when I saw the lights flickering down the hallway, I said, okay, it's leaving. So I went down to the door and I opened. I said, you can leave and you can never come back. And it went out the door, and we didn't have any more problems. And so, but that was the last time that we've had that level of a demon in our home up until last year. Now, prior to this big, huge incident that happened last January, at this point with this previous that we were just discussing, we had stopped casting demons out. And I know a lot of people think that that's counterintuitive, but sometimes you have to bind them instead of casting them out until the person's ready. I had a friend of mine who also dealt with a deliverance ministry, and she said that that's what she did with her niece. And I said, why would you do that? And she said, it's because she's not ready. And anytime that you cast them out, they come back stronger, with friends who are stronger. And it's harder to get them to leave and vacate. And she said, so I kind of thought about that. And so we just kept binding it until Bradley was ready. And so what we ended up doing last year, leading up to this big incident, we were having little demons that were coming in, and we would see like cats or rats. We had moved at this point. We were seeing like cats or like little mice. Like it was like little animals that were getting in the house, and you would see them and they would scurry, and then they were gone. But it was always in the peripheral vision of our eyes. And then it started getting a little bit more strange because we started hearing it, and it wasn't like it was outside. It was in the house, in the room we were in.
Where we saw a dog. I saw a dog one time.
Yeah.
Sitting in the doorway of my son's room, and I was the only person home at the time. But about 10 minutes later, the rest of the family got there, and they walked in, and I said, "Okay, somebody." We have a couple of dogs that were outside, and I said, okay, somebody stepped in some dog poo or something because it smelled like that in the house. And everybody checked their shoes, and there was nothing on their shoes, but it just got stronger and stronger, the smell. And I mean, that's exactly what it smelled like. And so I was walking around the house trying to figure out where it was coming from. And next thing I know, I'm standing over there in the doorway to my son's room where I'd just seen that dog, and it smelled extremely strong there. And so then I just rebuked it, commanded it to leave, and instantaneously the smell disappeared. And so really, if it's like my wife said, it was usually something out of your peripheral view, and it was something that you would see. You would just see a shadow, and you would think that you're seeing things. There was one time I was walking down the hall carrying a laundry basket, and this cat ran out from under my feet and into the living room. And I stopped and I said, Christina, and she looked at me and she said, yeah, I saw it too. And I thought I was imagining things, but as soon as she said my name, I knew what it was. So this wasn't a figment of my imagination or her. I mean, we both saw the same thing. And so anytime, like if you ever think that you see a cat out of the corner of your eyes or just a shadow move, that's potentially what that is.
They're called familiar spirits.
Exactly.
And the reason why they are called familiar spirits, I mean, I have not read the Harry Potter series at all, but I have seen one of the movies when it first came out, and I was like, I'm not watching this again because this is just demonic. And things do actually happen like that. There's also a reason why we don't watch The Princess and the Frog, which is a Disney movie, because at one point there is like this voodoo stuff that's going on with a bunch of shadows and stuff. If you've ever watched that, that's exactly how they slide all over the walls. It's like the lower level demons, if they can't get to 3 dimensions and walk around like a person, they will slide across the walls like that. And so we don't even invite any kind of anything like that into our home. But these, just like in Harry Potter or with any witch or warlock, like I'm very familiar with witches and warlocks, they have familiar spirits. These owls and the rats and things like that you see in the Harry Potter series, those are actually demons that are manifesting themselves as animals.
And that's why anytime you see a witch, like in a cartoon or Halloween decorations, and she has that black cat with her. Witches didn't have a literal black cat. The black cat represents the familiar spirit that the witch would use to perform her spells. It's the same thing if you've read the Recognitions of Clement, where Kiefa's debating Simon Magus. Simon Magus has this familiar spirit that he uses to do all of his spells. And it's the same way with witches today. That's how they do their quote unquote magic.
Yeah. But people, they just think that they're harmless and they're not. But familiar spirits can be passed down through families. Just like generational curses, which is related to familiar spirits, but it's different. It's like a genetic thing almost. But familiar spirits can be passed down through generation upon generation. That's why you have so many issues. I mean, the Bible says that the sins or iniquities of the fathers will be passed down through 3 or 4 generations. And that's how it happens. But you can break that curse. It's difficult. You have to be on guard a lot to be able to fix it and to overcome it. And you have to know what to do to get rid of these things. But So we were having a bunch of familiar spirits that were entering the home, and it usually was surrounding visitation. Now, keep in mind that I'm not judging anybody for anything, because honestly, there's a lot of people out there who just don't know. They have all these problems in their lives that seem to always be repeating, and they do not know where it's coming from. They have their mother had the problem, their grandmother had the problem, their father had the problem, their grandfather had the problem, and it just seems to always just follow them around, and they don't know what's going on. And I think that that's exactly what was happening in this instance. It's just that it was being transferred to my son. And the big thing that happened last January, we ended up having to talk to Jackson about it. And even with all my experience with it, I'd never dealt with something of this magnitude before. It got to the point where we had to make sure that I had my son in my sights at all times, that there were no toys, nothing was in his room at one point, because all his toys were right where I could see them, because he would use them as projectiles. It was very, very difficult to keep him safe, and that's when we were having to bind these spirits. But anytime that we cast them away, again, for about 2 weeks, he would be fine, and then it would come back even stronger. And so we were just having to deal with it at this point. And finally, we had ministered to him and talked to him, and then finally, when this big thing happened, we finally had to cast it away, because this one inhabited him. And it started while I was at a co-op. And unfortunately, a lot of people saw what had happened, and we had to bind it. And we got home, and my husband and I were praying over him, and it took us probably over an hour.
The thing that finally, and it's like Jackson was mentioning about using the name of Yeshua or Jesus. Some of these higher level ups, it's almost like they have no fear. Like they just, needless to say, we were trying to cast it out. We were commanding it to go, and it would not go, using both names and the name of the Father. And finally, we could not get it to leave. And I think that it was because our son had given this thing permission to be there. And so it's almost like I think the Holy Spirit told me to do this, because in the midst of this whole thing, and he was just trying to spit in our face and we were having to hold his hands back to keep him from scratching us. And I went and I grabbed the Bible and I turned to the book of Revelation, to the part where the demons are cast in the lake of fire. And I started, for lack of a better word, to ridicule this thing. And I read it to it and I said, see, look, you've already lost. You're nothing but a weak, beggarly little thing.
That's right.
And Yeshua's already claimed this child for himself. His name is written on his soul. I know you can see it. Your time is limited. And eventually the master's going to kick you out of there and you're going to lose. And the thing just started screaming for me to shut my mouth. And I kept it up and kept it up and kept it up. And then suddenly it just went quiet and it was gone. He didn't want to hear what the word said.
He didn't want to know what his future was. But we had used the things that we, and at one point we were doing the Eucharist which was completely foreign to me. I've been raised Pentecostal. We didn't do stuff like that. We took communion, but we did not do Eucharist. But any time that my son started after that, I mean, we just started doing it a couple weeks before that, but I almost think that it was kind of agitating it at one point, because the Eucharist is a holy thing, and he knew he was losing ground. So at one point, all of that happened, and then after that, we started, any time that he messed up, it wasn't like we were bashing him over the head or anything, but it was any time that he would do something that was anywhere even remotely like what he had done before with his behavior, we had him stand outside of the house, and we said, are you making covenant with us? And we had him take Eucharist again every single time, even if it took several times a day. And after a few months of that, it was him consciously making a decision to do the right thing every single day and choose God, to choose Yah, to choose Yeshua, to walk in the statutes of Torah.
Amen.
And now he's finally becoming happy. His heart is being healed. Now, what happened to cause this whole thing to begin with is that he was very hurt, and the enemy was whispering in his ear the whole time, you're not worth anything. You're not worthy. No one cares about you. No one loves you. You're a horrible person.
Exactly.
And anything that you could possibly think of, how can a 4-year-old think those things about themselves, except that something is whispering it to him? So the enemy damaged him to the point where he just felt so horrible about himself that he could not believe that anybody would love him, including his own father and myself. And then the enemy used everything around him to prove to him that he was right, that the enemy was right, that no one cared about him. And so at one point, that was why he gave in. And, well, no one cares about me. This is the only thing that cares about me is this demon, this person that I'm seeing.
Can I say something real quick? It's interesting almost. Okay, it's interesting that you said that these demons affect children that are either false children that have been adopted or children that are, I guess, the products of marriage, and they go into a different family situation. Because I myself have experienced and I've seen from the age, you mentioned age 2, from 2 years old and above, they would put me in my crib and I'd see these spirits at the head of my bed every night. And on the other side, you see an angel at the foot of the bed. And they were almost like a shadow of this, me, the little child in the middle, trying to sleep. But this seems to affect children of adoption, children who are foster children, children who are dealing with different family situations. And the devil does whisper in your ear. I mean, he told, particularly those that have a call or calling on their lives. The devil wants to destroy them immediately. He tried to kill me on day 1. It was the Metro Police Department down there in Miami. They brought me to my residence where I was because the devil had tried to kill me upon my birth. So this is some serious stuff. Yeah. And it's real.
Well, my oldest son, his name, God named him. I was going to name him Nathaniel, which means a gift. But God told me to name him Gabriel, which means a messenger of God. Mm-hmm. And how can a messenger deliver a message if they can't talk? Well, he was damaged his brain was damaged through a vaccination injury, and he became autistic when he was very small. And I've battled and worked with him for years to get him to where he can communicate, which he was the one that did the dinosaur presentation the other day. And so that was a huge deal for him to be able to do that, because normally he couldn't have talked. And with Bradley, he has a big calling on his life. All of our children do. But the boys, they have a calling on their lives, and the enemy is attacking them in a way that will cripple them so that they can't do what they're supposed to do when they're older.
Next is one of the most unusual hymns that we could ever find. It's found in the Methodist hymn book of all places, and it's called Silence, Frenzied, Unclean Spirit. Wait till you hear of this. We will continue this discussion in the next session. Don't miss it on Jackson Snyder Present.